The emergence of a national market and the rise of corporations. This is the second video of our Rise of Industry unit. In it, we will discuss the changes in markets and business structures as a result of the second industrial revolution in the United States. The emergence of a national market. The United States population more than tripled in the period between 1860 and 1920. The rapid growth was due to a constant inflow of European and Asian immigrants. This rapid population growth was ultimately favorable to the economy. Immigrants increased the demand for goods and services, while at the same time they served as a source of cheap labor for the growing industrial sector. Long-distance communications were improved. Manufacturing increased, the West was settled, and railroads expanded to connect places all over the country. Thanks to all of these conditions, a true national market emerged, replacing regional markets. Products were shipped all over the country at reasonable prices for the first time. This era would see the birth of department stores, mail order catalogs, specialty shops, and commercial advertisement. The large national market also made economically feasible capital industries. Oil, steel, coal, and machinery were shipped all over the country as well. The rise of corporations. Before the Civil War, most businesses were either owned by individuals or by a group of partners. This type of business structure, the owners are personally liable or responsible for their company's debt. Company failures usually meant financial ruin for their owners, who often had to sell their personal property to pay the company's debts. Additionally, most businesses disappeared upon their owner's death. After the Civil War, all of this would change. A new form of enterprise became common: the corporation. A corporation is a company chartered by the state, which is legally recognized as a separate person. The corporation issues stocks or shares of ownership to investors. Anyone that has stocks becomes a partial owner of the company. And because corporations are separate legal entities, owners are not personally responsible for corporate debt. Shareholders receive income in the form of dividends and elect a board of directors, who in turn appoint a general manager or CEO to run the company. Stocks are transferable and can be inherited or sold. This business structure was important in the industrialization process. By issuing stocks, companies were able to raise large amounts of money almost instantly, allowing for the creation of larger business enterprises, especially those that required large initial investments, such as railroad companies, steel plants, telephone, and building companies. Corporations, as large companies, enjoy advantages over small businesses, such as the existence of economies of scale, cheaper sources of supply, and efficient management. Economies of scale refers to the fact that as the scale or size of production increases, companies are able to cut costs and become more efficient. Large companies could afford greater specialization of labor, mechanization, and the use of assembly lines, making products more efficiently and affordable. Large companies also had access to cheaper sources of supply. Because of their size and the amount of inputs required, many companies could bargain for price discounts when buying inputs or raw materials in bulk. Large companies also had more efficient management. They generally had specialized departments to deal with the different aspects of a business. Large companies adopted accounting practices to make decisions based on data, started advertisement and marketing departments to attract customers, and had experts developing new products or improving existing ones. Monopolies. Large companies, however, concentrated a lot of market power and often eliminated the competition as they consolidated into monopolies. A monopoly is the complete control over an industry and the takeover of all production for that good or service. monopolies commonly present disadvantages to the general public. Since they don't have any competition, monopolists have no incentive to innovate or improve their products. Monopolists can also excessively raise prices to increase profits. Consumers have no choice or alternative and are forced to pay high prices. Some companies took control of all the stages of production and distribution. This practice is known as vertical integration. Companies often own supplies of raw materials, transportation networks, manufacturing facilities, and distribution systems. Other companies effectively ended up buying out the competition and controlling one stage of production for a good or commodity. This practice is known as horizontal integration and seeks to create a monopoly by eliminating the competition. The consolidation of big businesses. During the economic collapse of 1873, entrepreneurs like Carnegie and Rockefeller used cutthroat competition to eliminate business competitors. These companies would temporarily lower prices even if it meant taking losses, to drive the competition out of business. Once competitors failed and closed, a monopoly was established, and prices could be raised again to increase profits. Business consolidation took many other forms. Among them, we have pooling agreements, trusts, and holding companies. Pooling agreements were informal agreements among competitors to fix prices and divide markets geographically. This type of agreement was widely used by railroad companies. Trusts became a popular form of business consolidation. A trust combined many firms or corporations through a legal agreement. Stockholders of existing companies gave their stocks over to the board of directors of a trust in exchange for trust certificates, which entitled their holders to dividends based on profits. All companies under the trust were managed as a single enterprise, effectively creating a monopoly. Another form of consolidation was holding companies. Holding companies really don't produce anything. Their primary goal is to own a controlling number of shares in other companies that do produce a good or service. Similar to trusts, holding companies effectively eliminated the competition by merging all companies under their control. The government's response. As you can see, the growth in corporate power affected the American consumer. Prices were constantly increasing, and products were not of the best quality or standards. How did the government react to this? As you probably remember, the federal government had taken a laissez-faire approach to the economy, with little intervention and no major regulation to control monopolists or their abusive practices. Business leaders tried to influence key government officials by making hefty contributions to their campaigns and sometimes even secretly bribing them. The press started denouncing the abuses of monopolists and the rampant corruption in the government. In newspapers, political cartoons portrayed businesses and business leaders as powerful monsters who had taken the government hostage and were devouring or destroying everything in their path. State governments did pass laws regulating grain elevators and railroads, which were challenged in the Supreme Court. While the case Munn versus Illinois upheld regulation on businesses affecting the public interest, in Wabash versus Illinois, the court determined that railroads could not be regulated by states because that specific power was given to Congress, not states. In 1887, Congress passed the Interstate Act in response to Wabash versus Illinois. This law established a regulatory agency and forbade unfair practices by railroads and pooling agreements. With pressure from the press, and before the glaring abuses of business leaders, U.S. lawmakers finally acknowledged the dangers of monopoly and started passing laws to eliminate or at least break trusts and other forms of consolidation. The first antitrust laws were weakly enforced but served as a precedent. The Sherman Antitrust Act was passed in 1890 and forbade trusts combinations, and conspiracies that limited or restricted interstate commerce. The language of this law was vague, and in the 1890s, the Sherman Antitrust Act was used against labor unions, rather than against the big businesses, as it was intended.